So again, everyone, thanks so much for spending some time with us today. It's afternoon in some places, morning for others, so it's a mix, so we really appreciate that. Thanks for getting together with us to talk cybersecurity and dig into the most impactful findings of this year's SonicWall threat report, among many other things. So it's great to see a lot of familiar names and a great mix of new names as well. Hopefully everybody is continuing to stay sane and healthy. I am Kara Parfit. I'm Director of Vendor and Product Management here at Cerdant, and guiding us today are two of our very favorite people. Cerdant CTO, Joshua Skeens, of course, and Josh has been at Cerdant just about since the beginning of time, but is sneaking up on 20 years of overall cybersecurity and IT industry experience. So as CTO at Cerdant, Josh has had the wonderful opportunity to work with many companies in the US and across the world, and really focuses on driving our day-to-day operations with Cerdant from a focus on security, business development, and culture on the Cerdant side. And also joining us today is our favorite really partner in crime, especially for Josh, is SonicWall's Vice President of Platform Architecture, Dmitriy Ayrapetov. Dmitriy, I think I'm getting pretty good at pronouncing your last name after all of these years. I'm gonna pat myself on the back. So Dmitriy has also held product management and engineering roles at SonicWall and came to them in 2005 via their acquisition of an SSL VPN startup. So he knows where all the bodies are buried. But as a cybersecurity expert, he frequently speaks at industry conferences, including RSA and the Gartner Security Summit, and of course, the highly coveted annual Cerdant Security Conference. So we're in great company today. So a few housekeeping items really quick. As always, please use the Q&A box for any questions you have. Ask them throughout or save them. It's completely up to you. We'll answer anything we can in real time, but we'll have time at the end for questions as well. And if there are any topics that you really want to make sure that we touch on, feel free to send those to me in the chat or post them in the Q&A. We want to kind of try to keep things as active and engaging as we can today. So we're really going to be doing more discussing than presenting. So hopefully that's news to everybody's ears. And just one more quick thing, you have really the best control over your viewing experience. So we will have a deck up. Most of it will drive talking points, some important data we want to hit on, but really the high point will be the discussion. So up in the top right-hand corner, your view box, I would suggest side-by-side gallery option. And then there is a slider that will divide the PowerPoint and the video window. So if you move that slider to the left, you can kind of minimize the PowerPoint versus the video thumbnail. So it's not a static screen, it's staring you in the face the entire time. You'll have good discussion with us. So I will not suck up any more air in the room, and I will go ahead and hand things over to Josh and Dmitriy to get started.
Yeah, thanks, Kara. I think Dmitriy, back in August we did this. We went for 2 hours, and we cut it down this time, so it won't be as long. But we have just as much to talk about, so we're going to try to cram it in here for everybody. But if anybody that's ever watched us talk before, neither one of us are really too keen on PowerPoints. A lot of times we don't even want to use one, but it does guide a discussion. But this time, we wanted to do something a little bit different, something we haven't done before. So what we did is, we talked a little bit and we discussed overall arching topics that we wanted to talk about. And then we were kind of challenging each other here. We sent just a bunch of words, and we're going to use these word clouds that you'll see, and we're just going to pick a random word on here, and we might crash and burn. We don't know what the responses are going to be, or we might even actually know what the topic's going to be about, but we'll do that. You might see a cat run back and forth there for Dmitriy. So this should be a pretty entertaining time. So really this first slide here that I want to jump into, it's going to be the overall theme of the day for us, and that is, security. We're going to talk about vulnerabilities and breaches. We're going to talk about work from home because, as you can tell, Dmitry's still at home and many people are still at home. Kara's at home right now. And our lives have just changed. They're not really going back. So it's important that we talk about that and we think about that. And as we go through that, really, I'm going to throw it over to you, Dmitriy. I'm going to pick a word off of here. And the word that I really would like to hear you talk about right now, or really an acronym, I guess, it's pretty popular today, is IoT. What does that mean to you right now?
Hi, Josh. First of all, Great to be back at this event chatting with you. This is an annual tradition now. IoT to me is kind of like cloud. It's a Rorschach test, right? And also it's something where if you ask 10 people, you'll get 15 opinions on the definition. Where I would like to focus, what was interesting to me with IoT is the past 1 year with people working from home. And, I'm kind of jumping right away to some of the findings in the threat report, but what we saw was a large jump in attacks against kind of consumer grade router hardware. We've talked about consumer grade routers, stuff that people pull off the Best Buy shelf, the TP-Link, D-Links, Linksys, etc. They might have it running for 10 years at home. They might not even know where it is anymore in their home, right? But those devices run, they don't get patched, not because the vendors don't release patches, but because people just don't care. They don't patch their devices. And attackers know how to find these by using Shodan, that IoT search engine, right? I can go right now and find every single D-Link router connected or every single Linksys router connected to the internet. And if I know that there is a vulnerability that's not patched, I as an attacker can now use it in a programmatic way to attack these home networks. Now, a year and a half ago, that might have been boring. You'd get somebody's family pictures, you might extract $300 of Bitcoin out of them. Great, right? But now, over the past year, if you think about it, like, the home networks got a lot more interesting. There might be Dmitriy sitting here connected to the company and using, his corporate laptop here. Josh might be working from home. There might be people from finance, HR sitting at home with their corporate laptops on the same network, on a nice, flat, juicy network. And we saw that in the threat report that the number of attempted attacks against these consumer routers has gone up tremendously over the past year, which doesn't surprise me, but it's on one hand scary, but at the same time, you could have predicted that because home networks are more interesting now, so people will get attacked at their home networks. So that's where I like to focus on IoT. I mean, there's always the cameras and the industrial IoT, the power grid. That's a bigger topic, but I think something that one little tidbit out of the report that really stuck with me, it kind of validated the fears from the last 5-7 years of this potentially happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was looking at a stat a couple weeks ago. They're predicting the end of this year, 35 billion devices connected to the internet, and in 2025, 75 plus billion. I mean, that opens up a lot of doors into people's homes and back into businesses too, because you have to think people go home with a corporate laptop that has an always-on VPN, and now their kid jumps on it to do schoolwork and mistakenly clicks on something. Now they have access right back into the corporate network. Our security landscape has drastically changed over the last 14 to 16 months, more so than I've seen it probably in the last 10 years, really.
Yeah. Let me, on a related topic, now that we're working from home for a year, and let's pick the word perimeterless, right? The perimeter, we've been talking about the perimeter disappearing for the past 5-7 years. Well, here we are. Now it's like been smashed. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's gone, right? The perimeter as we have known it for probably much of our career, and many of the people that are, probably watching us right now, it's gone. We don't have employees in the brick and mortar. We don't have employees sitting behind that firewall that's in the rack with the switching and all the cabling that you can control. It's all gone. Needless to say as well, now you're missing all that security scanning that you would normally get off of an enterprise grade firewall. Or if you had your own IDS system that's in place, like that all disappears once everybody grabs their laptops or even uses home PCs now to then use a VPN to get back into the office. So what was once maybe a 1-2 office perimeter that you could, pretty feasibly get your arms around, well, we essentially have gone to maybe 200 plus offices with everybody being at home that now you have to protect. And you can't just go slam a hardware firewall in everybody's house really quickly, even if you wanted to. I mean, it might not even be financially possible to do that. But now it means what we did early on, and you and I have discussed about this over the months, when we ran at COVID and everybody had to do a light switch and we had to run home really quickly and get all the employees, if that was a new motion for you, and it was a new motion for most people because pre-COVID, less than 7% of businesses had remote employees. You know, you read all the articles about let people work flex time and work wherever they want, and you know, people are doing whatever. It was less than 10% of businesses in the United States had even one single work from home employee. You know, March comes of 2020, we flip a light switch, everybody has to go home. So we did what we had to do as practitioners to get people online and working. But that's not sustainable now, I don't believe. And again, I think we're jumping ahead a little bit here, but I don't feel like that's sustainable from a security strategy, because employees are not coming back to the office full time. It's not going to happen. Work from home is here to stay, whether it's full-time, hybrid. So now we have to look at what our security strategy is and revamp it for what is a new world for all of us from a security perspective.
You know, I actually kind of like it. I know it must have been painful for people, but at the same time, I think this yanked everybody into the future in a way. There was I wish I'd thought of this before and included this comic. There was a funny kind of comic, which also reflects the reality that was like, CIO survey of what drove your digital transformation is like board pressure, like 10%, or business needs, 5%, COVID-19, 90%, you know, and in reality, you know, I'm now starting to talk to agencies and, you know, analysts about the questions are coming up of what happens when we come back to normal. Vaccination rates are increasing in the US. You know, the rest of the world will catch up. Sooner or later, we will be able to come back to normal. But now what the security industry is asking, kind of grappling with is, okay, so what is that going to look like? And in a way, I think this has been a good experiment, because now whether people come back, you know, some people will stay remote, some people will come back into the office, but overall organizations have been yanked into the future in their security posture and in their awareness, you know, whether it's the now, you know, the endpoint is much stronger, or the cloud security is much stronger, multi-factor authentication is understood, remote access is much better understood, which some of these components are also excellent stepping stones towards a zero trust type deployment, which is I want to be clear, zero trust is not a product, it's a process or it's a mental framework, right? But it's now some of these stepping stones are in place that would have been otherwise painful or long to implement.
Yeah, I mean, you know, just to kind of wrap on this slide, I mean, really that it forced everybody to rip the Band-Aid, right? And a lot of time you have to think about this in technology and security. We typically don't promote rip the Band-Aid, right? Because it's too painful from a security and technology perspective. It's more planned out, it's more process driven, and this really forced us to rip the Band-Aid and move forward, and probably move forward by 5 or 10 years really in the industry.
Yeah.
So, well, let's go to the next one. Breaches, right? Breaches everywhere. You know, one of my morning routines is I get up every morning, probably get a workout in, you know, come to the office, fire up the laptop, and immediately checking Twitter or checking, you know, SC Magazine, threat posts, Ars Technica, something to see who's been breached. Because I can guarantee you every single morning I get up today, somebody's been breached, right? So it's important to know that from an industry perspective, because somebody that we might use from a company perspective, we might have hardware, somebody that our customers might use, we need to know that stuff. So it's important, I feel like, as a good security practitioner to stay up on that. So something else, you know, you and I were talking about last night, and again, I don't think any of this is rehearsed. You know, Dmitriy and I hadn't talked in several months, and we were just trying to catch up because we really hadn't even got to talk about, like, hey, what are we going to talk about? So, you know, we had Kara sweating bullets like normal. You know, we're last second trying to throw PowerPoint slides and talking points together. And I told her even this morning, just calm down. It'll be okay. We'll be good to go. We'll pull through.
They're best organically.
As I've told multiple people inside the company, I will make you sweat, but I will not let you down.
Yep.
I trust them.
Dmitry, you know Keith, you work with him for years, and you know he works with us now. And he said, if I know it, he told me last night, he said, are you guys ready? And I said, we're not even done. And I said, the reality is we haven't even started yet. And he said, well, if I know any two people that can pull this off, you guys always pull it together. I said, well, I appreciate that. I don't know whether that's a blessing or a curse, but I digress. But we were talking about, we went back and reviewed the talk that we did in August, and something that you actually brought up that you said kept you up at night actually happened. So do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I wish I could like have put a bet in Vegas on this, right? What I was telling Josh is what I presented last year that keeps me up at night is supply chain attacks, and I'll keep saying that if I get ransomware at home, it's going to be because of a supply chain attack. And later on, when I'm sharing the screen, I can show you all the icons of all the utilities that I'm running and all the different things that I have, and especially the techies among us who know better and who are running, again, Notepad++ and Rufus Boot USB Builder and Image Burn and, all these other different utilities. If I was an attacker, what I would do is I would infect those utilities. And that's what keeps me up at night. And that's what we talked about last August. And then, a different, on the other side of the spectrum, but a similar thing obviously happened with SolarWinds. The attack there wasn't targeting random techies sitting at home installing utilities because they know better. It was a highly targeted attack against kind of the keys to the kingdom management software. But it's still, I think it shook in my view, it kind of shook the security industry also to the core. You see zero trust conversations right now picking up more and more. I faced a lot of questions of like, would your firewall block SolarWinds? I'm like, listen, I would love to say yes. And yes, we have signatures and all that stuff. But believe me, when an attacker like SVR wants to get into your network, they're going to get in. But how do you keep the script kiddies? How do you keep the copycats out of this? And how do you prevent something like a supply chain attack? Because the attack vector is super insidious. I mean, if you think back to WannaCry, right, 2017, WannaCry was also a supply chain attack. And just as a reminder for everyone, what happened there was the Ukrainian tax software. Like imagine TurboTax or Intuit QuickBooks, right? Everyone uses it. It's ubiquitous. Everyone trusts it. Their update server was compromised and an update was inserted into the TurboTax or QuickBooks update, the equivalent, the Ukrainian equivalent. And when people updated the software, right, you don't scan your updates for malware, or you even can't because they come in as libraries and as packages that are non-executable. It requires manual analysis to be able to tell that they're malicious. And that's how WannaCry started, right? And these things, like that's why it keeps me up at night, is you can scan all you want, but it's by the time you detect it, it's going to be too late. So what do you do then? And that's where segmentation and limited trust. This is where the zero trust conversation starts coming in. But anyway, yeah, I wish I, in a kind of a perverse way, I wish I had bet last year, put my money where my mouth was, and unfortunately, it did manifest itself. And I still think it's a problem. In fact, my prediction and my fear is that this is going to inspire a lot of copycats. And in the next 1 to 1.5 years, I think we will see a lot more supply chain attacks that manifest themselves in different ways. And like we can look at an example of side channel attacks 3 years ago. Google, released a paper. It was monumental, side channel attacks on the processor. And then what happened? Every month there was a new piece of research. And why does that happen? Because security researchers say, hey, that's an amazing area to research, right? Or same, likewise, attackers can say, hey, wait a minute, I haven't thought of this. I can do the same. And you're already starting to see this where and the supply chain attack doesn't have to be a software update, for example. It's also on the developer side. Like for those of you who have, who have developers in house, there have already been examples, and Netflix and Microsoft got hit with this, where well-known packages on GitHub get code inserted into them, and developers like to reuse code. Developers are taught to reuse code because you don't want to keep reinventing the wheel over and over. So they use these packages. They build these packages into their products, and inadvertently they end up pulling in code that's been compromised. There's a little bit more nuance to that attack. I'm happy to talk about, what happened with Netflix and Microsoft, but these attacks will continue to happen because attackers right now saw that, hey, wait a minute, there's this ripe opportunity. People haven't battened down the hatches against this yet. So I unfortunately predict that the next 1.5 years we'll continue to see supply chain attacks until it kind of fizzles out and people harden it enough, or attackers find something new and shiny.
Yeah, I mean, there was actually one, this last 5-7 days, Code Cove came out and released that they basically had a supply chain, and then their supplying code to businesses like Microsoft that was then using said code. I mean,
Exactly. And it's a one-line thing. For those of you who have been developers, you know, the curl bash combination, which is a download from the web and run it on the computer combination, and that's in one line. It's a one-line change. But that type of change snuck in secretly, right, opens up a backdoor, and that's all that somebody needs to get in. So now, I mean, again, it's a cat and mouse thing where I would say WannaCry was the first big one, but we all forgot lessons from that. We focused on the damage rather than the source of the damage. SolarWinds, I think, really highlighted the source of the damage. So now we'll start seeing the copycats. And by the way, this is not a new attack. This stuff has been happening for decades. You can go back into, you know, Cold War. This has been happening from all sides and everywhere. It's just this is the newest instance of it, and it will continue. It will be. It'll manifest itself, I think, in the next few years, again, via attacks that affect kind of like the regular humans like us.
Yeah, you know, what I like to say is, you know, we have to be right 100% of the time. They only have to be right once.
Yeah.
So we need to understand that that's just not possible for us to do as from a security side, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't still try and do our due diligence on making sure that we're as secure as possible.
Yeah. So the other type of breach that's now going to be in the news, and this is again a little bit looking forward and a little bit looking backwards, is well, Josh, why don't you talk about the LinkedIn $2 one, and then we can riff on that with current Facebook drama as well.
Yeah, so you know that's on there. I wouldn't consider that a breach, right? But what I'm saying is that's going to be a breach in the future. And for anybody that, you know, I'll catch people up to speed if they don't know about it. So recently, 500 million plus LinkedIn files were put up for sale. The hacker then went and posted some of those files so you could verify its authenticity for $2. So for $2, you could pull down some of the PII data that was scrubbed from LinkedIn. And really that's what happened. This person basically, whether it was a person or a group of people, took the time to scrape LinkedIn, put together 500 million plus pieces of information in a database that now contains PII information for people, first name, last name, job titles, previous job history, email addresses, potentially, you know, other information that can be used now in a large scale phishing attack or a spear phishing attack, to where these are going to be very sophisticated in the future. They're going to hit a lot of high executives or people that carry security clearance, and there will be a successful breach that comes out of this if there hasn't been already. So it's almost like a new type of breach, right? It's where, what I like to tell people is that once you put your information on the internet, everybody knows that it's out there. You can't really pull it back. And then it will possibly be used against you and or your business currently or in the future in a malicious way. And that's just the state of the internet today and all the information that's out there. I'm not telling people that we need to all go buy 100 acres in Montana and like shut everything off and burn our cell phones, but we just have to be aware of that stuff. It's very scary. Probably some of the stuff that me and Dmitriy, you know, get our hands on or even get to be involved in is, you know, would probably blow some people's minds. But we just have to be aware of it. And from a breach perspective, again, it's not necessarily a breach today, but it is going to end up being a breach tomorrow. You know, probably back in 2016, 2017 at a security conference, that was shortly after LinkedIn had been actually breached and passwords were out on the internet. We basically took the attendee list, cross-referenced it against email addresses that were in that database file that we were able to get our hands on that had the passwords. And we were able to find one person at the security conference that still was using the same password that had been breached within 18 months. They'd never updated it. And we basically called that out in the security conference. We didn't tell the person exactly, but I can tell you at least 50 people came up to me over the course of 2 days and was like, was that me? Was that me? And I said, I can't tell you, but what I can tell you is you need to change your password. So it's just important because that information's out there and it's always going to be out there.
Yeah, and in a way, this is not to scare you all. This is, you know, later on in the presentation, we'll show you as we look forward. We'll share some information that's sort of, you know, on the virus theme is meant to inoculate you against future things. And think of this, think of the availability, what Josh said, anything that's online is permanently online and will be used eventually somehow and tied, into something malicious. And exactly as Josh said, doesn't mean, let's stick our heads in the sand, but it's awareness, right? So, and let me give you a very concrete example of how some data, how some information can be weaponized into a phishing campaign or a business email compromise. Or so I worked with back when we were at Dell, we worked, SecureWorks was also part of Dell, and we co-presented a lot. And one of the higher level people, I'll keep his name out, but one of the higher level people at SecureWorks, who's a known entity, he's a known name, shared a phishing story, which scared the crap, scared me because how real it was. So what happened is they found out from some public data, the attackers found out which school his kids are at. And he received an email. So imagine receiving an email faked from the school saying your child's name has had an accident and please fill out this, they're okay, but they're in emergency, whatever, and please open up this form for information and consent. This is where, as a parent, your defenses just drop completely, right? You're an animal brain right now. And you click anything, all your training and all the things, right? You're just opening, like what's going on. And he recognized that was a very, very targeted phishing attack. But the way it was crafted was to lower his defenses. We all know not to open up executables or open up PDF files, right? And then yet somebody still opens up a PDF file that's like, hey, the accidental shipment of 5,000 Bitcoins, to your address, like here, please open to confirm, right? But this is where that scraped information will find its way. And it's just a matter of being aware, right? And again, we'll come back to this topic of inoculating people against future threats. But anything that's public, and this is also a good reminder, don't put anything online that you don't want to be permanently online. If we have time later, I'll share a personal story from that. That's fun. I think, Josh, we have to talk about Microsoft and Hafnium.
Yeah, so we were talking about that last night, and we were kind of sharing like war stories back and forth. 2 weeks ago, I was on the phone with a customer, and I'm not going to name any names because they could be on here. And we were just talking, and I was, talking about security, the landscape, some things that they could be doing, and they talked about their Exchange server, and I was like, well, what do you think about Hafnium? Were you affected? Did you get the patch applied? They're like, oh no, we haven't taken any action yet. We're trying to get to it. And I was like, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get off this phone call, and I'm going to save you 45 minutes, and now you can go patch your Exchange server. And then you probably need to call forensics company to see if you've already been compromised. And I literally ended the call early because I was like, I don't want to be a part of something that happens, and I'm wasting, at that point in time, I'm wasting critical time. Luckily, they were able to get it patched. They didn't experience a breach. There had been some malicious activity on the server, but thankfully they were okay. And Dmitry, you kind of said you had the same thing.
I had same kind of. I've had several conversations where we were talking, and somebody says, yeah, we have an on-prem Exchange server, and I said exactly the same thing. I'm like, we're not continuing this conversation until you tell me that you've patched. And they're like, yeah, we've patched. I'm like, okay. Otherwise, I would literally hang up and tell you get off and do something more important.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess what are your takeaways and your perspective of the whole Hafnium thing? I mean, not just from a Microsoft perspective, but I mean, I think it's going to force a lot more people now to look at whether they really want to have on-prem stuff, although moving things to the cloud doesn't just mean that everything goes away, right? That opens up a completely different can of worms for you from a security perspective. Again, I say it all the time, people get tired of hearing me saying it, the cloud is somebody else's computer. It still requires security. So don't think that just because you go to Microsoft 365 that all your problems go away. But it is going to open up some eyes and push people more towards cloud management, I believe.
It will be a push towards that infrastructure, right? And not everybody can convert. I think if anything, that was a wake-up call kind of towards our next topic of vulnerabilities. But in terms of patch, having a patching strategy, and I feel like a broken record, patch. And I'm talking as a vendor who provides no products that help with patching, other than maybe virtual patching through intrusion prevention. But if anything, this is an exercise for people to see how good their organization is in quickly reacting and patching something critical. Because there's you can and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, Josh, but we talked about the cost benefit analysis of fast patch something quickly in production and risk versus like take it slow. And Hafnium was this example of a vulnerability was a good a case study in where you drop everything, damn the torpedoes, right? You patch because it's a internet facing server that has a remotely executable flaw that is pre-authentication. That's like the worst thing that you can possibly have. And this thing is one of the highest privileged systems that you have. This is where you drop everything, you patch. And yeah, this was actually, I think this is a bigger impact than the SolarWinds hack, because SolarWinds attack was targeted, but it was targeted primarily at well-resourced organizations. So it was damaging, but it was damaging against those who can absorb the damage and respond. Hafnium was damaging against many of those who don't even know that they're being like taken for a full ride, you know, and so I think it was actually a lot more dangerous than the SolarWinds attack. Which actually kind of, you know, flows into the next set of conversation on vulnerabilities, because just as a quick level set for everyone, the whole Hafnium attack, it was a vulnerability in Microsoft Exchange, on-prem Exchange, that allowed remote access or remote execution on the Exchange server over the internet. And you can't hide your Exchange server. I mean, you can completely block it off, but then nobody can work remotely unless they have VPN, and that's just a 10-year-old architecture. But I mean, vulnerabilities are just Josh, I don't want to say I'm ready to give up, but man, it's just been bad.
No, it's I keep telling everybody like this year's the year of the vulnerability, but really like that's kind of a play on words, right? Because if you go back from 2010, every year's the year of the vulnerability because it's just gotten worse and worse. And there's some numbers up here in this word cloud. So 18,103, that was the total amount of vulnerabilities discovered or disclosed in 2020. 10,342, that was the total amount of critical or high vulnerabilities that were found in 2020. That number is actually greater than the total amount of vulnerabilities that were found in 2010 combined. So we're on record pace in 2021 for vulnerabilities, but the caveat to that is we've increased vulnerabilities every single year since 2010. So probably next year, we could probably do the same slide and say, hey, it's the year of the vulnerability again, right? So why do you feel like that is, Dmitry? Is it work from home? Is it because there's more devices connected to the internet that's not behind enterprise security solutions or even built from an, like back to your IoT perspective?
Yeah,
some of these devices aren't even built with security into them.
there are two angles to this, and I approach this from both from a business perspective or from a kind of behavioral perspective and from a technical perspective as a former engineer. As a former engineer, as systems get more and more complex, mistakes are going to happen. Let's go back to the basics. What are vulnerabilities? Vulnerabilities are assumptions made by a programmer while implementing a problem, right? So I'm an engineer and I'm solving a business problem. We need a web portal that takes, I don't know, some input, and I need to get that business problem solved. And I just assume that normal people, let's say that input is a name, people's name. I assume most people's names are going to be fewer than 30 characters. That's a stupid assumption on my behalf, but that's just, I'm a programmer, right? I'm just solving a problem in front of me. That assumption then gets exploited by someone else, and this is why the security field will never go away. It's humans taking advantage of other humans' mistakes. That's what it comes down to. So a programmer solved the problem with some assumptions, such as a name is never longer than 30 characters. Somebody else comes in and says, haha, I caught you. Here, I'm going to type something in that's 1,000 characters. And that initial programmer's mistake translates into a vulnerability. I mean, there's a lot of really cool stuff that then happens and how that's exploited. But the point is, the more complex the systems are, and the more people build on top of things, the more interaction between the different systems there is, the more there is possibility for mistakes. So that's not going away. That's on the technical side. On the behavioral side, there's also, I kind of have observed a pendulum of, sometimes there's a lot of greenfield for new technologies, and companies rush in and build new products, new technologies, the cloud adoption, whatever, right? And then once that reaches critical mass and people are dependent on it, then the attackers come in and start saying, hey, that's juicy, that's interesting, right? Let me start attacking that. And then it's a natural cycle of people finding errors in that, and then that getting patched. So this is just natural kind of state of things. Okay, so what? I think that this is I hate the word new normal now because it's beaten that to death at this point. But for all of you listening, you start treating as everything that you have. Here's my mental mindset now: everything that I use is vulnerable. What are you going to do about it? Right? How are you going to protect yourself? Everything at any given point is going to be vulnerable. Netflix has they actually released a tool, but they had I think it was like 5-7 years ago, they had a methodology in their data center called and they actually released a tool called Chaos Monkey. So what Chaos Monkey is, and you can Google it, you just Google Netflix Chaos Monkey. It's thought process around resiliency in the data center, where they said, imagine there is a chaotic monkey that goes around and just flips things off in the data center and turns things off and pulls cables, right? Do things continue to work? If the answer is no, you didn't build a resilient system. Go back and try again. And in fact, they now have it as a script that you can run on your data center. It's a Chaos Monkey, right? To test the resilience of your systems. Now, that's a cloud scale engineering, but you can apply that Chaos Monkey mindset to your own systems, but apply it in a vulnerability mindset. If a particular system is vulnerable, how screwed are you, right? What is the impact? I like another I keep gushing about this guy, Dan Geer, and I might have mentioned this in the past. I really like his analogy of how security should become, we should think about security as a utility. Think about electricity. We have a lot of equipment that's built in to prevent electrical outages, but we also know that if there's a power outage, that there are UPSs, there are all these different things that snap back in and you are back in business. And the idea here is, his analogy was that security should also be designed around security should also be kind of like utility. If you put everything in the prevention basket, that's great, but sometimes something is going to happen. You can't avoid that. So the question is, how quickly do you snap back into operational? Are you out for 2 weeks? Or are you back in a proverbial 1 second or less than a second, like with electricity, right? So this is where my approach to these vulnerabilities is that they're going to continue to happen as things get more complex, as things get more digitized. Cars are now computers, cameras are now computers, phones are now computers, clocks are now computers, etc. Everything is a computer that has a specific function. The more that happens, the more vulnerabilities it'll be. This is the new norm. I'll get off my soapbox.
Nah, we're kind of on the same thing. I jump ahead a little bit, but as you know, I've talked to you a lot about what I call continuous vulnerability scanning, right? I feel like, I believe that's going to be the future. I think it's going to catch on. And businesses are going to start to utilize that in a different way, because if you look, typically it's around 85 to 90% of most breaches happen because of some sort of vulnerability that was known and had a patch that had not been patched yet. So let's say that we just take that practice of patching, you've now reduced the scope to 10%. That's a pretty drastic measure to be able to do that. And I think that really from an industry perspective, we have to take a harder stance on patching and looking at our vulnerabilities that way. And that's coming, I guess, from two guys that really don't sell products or support products that have anything to do with patching, right? And we're talking about it and beating that horse. So
yeah. And I think you're absolutely right. I think that's another thing. Just if you have a takeaway from this, is that we're not trying to just to scare you guys, right? We want there to be takeaways, and that is, I think the past year has taught us that patching your equipment, patching your critical infrastructure is absolutely critical. In fact, here's a prediction, Josh. I bet you that at some point in the next several years, as part of the support contract or cyber insurance, I'm going to go there. Cyber insurance as part of the language is now going to have some language, is going to be amended to include a test of whether or not your equipment is patched. So therefore, like, I can imagine, I'm not a lawyer, but I can imagine a clause that's something like, if you experience a breach and your equipment was vulnerable and the patch has been available for at least 30 days, our coverage is void. right?
Yeah.
I
Hey.
fully expect that type of stuff now.
I can tell you it's already happening.
Okay.
I know that some of the breach packages and insurance have already changed. It says basically lines that say if you have not done your due diligence by patching a product that had a known vulnerability with an available patch, null and void. We can't cover you.
Exactly. I mean, you got to give people a window to do it, but at the same time, if they're past that window, it's on you. I cannot help you if you cannot help yourself.
Right.
Yeah. All right. I think we've covered this one, and I see some commentary, and if there are questions, feel free to type questions in the chat window. Josh and I are seasoned enough where we can kind of like read and talk at the same time and work it into the conversation. So you don't necessarily need to save your questions towards the end. Should we move on, Josh?
Yeah, we'll move on here. The next one is really it's work from home here, and we've got two funny images up here because Dmitriy and I talk about the exact same thing, but we talk about it differently. Of course, Dmitriy's mind goes to food, so he'll talk about a crunchy outside with the gooey inside, and I talk about a castle, and what I mean by that is we're talking about security in general, right? And how it used to be perceived, and that was to you have a castle with everything you have inside of it, with a moat around it, and a drawbridge, and you have your archers and your really tall walls. And then Dmitriy, he looks at it from a food perspective. It's the crunchy outside and the gooey inside, right? So we like to put our images up there and talk about that. But we talked about this a little bit earlier, but work from home, it's here to stay. So what does the word, let's see, a little vertical there. What's the word hybrid mean to you?
Yeah, and this work from home, we already kind of started going into this. It's hard to avoid, but you see companies now, large names, announcing that they're allowing their workforce to work from anywhere. Now, are we going to 100% stay there? I don't think so. Like I'm sometimes dying to get back to the office just to have a different, I love this, but I want to change the scenery. Also, I want to talk to people. But what this is, what it will lead to is companies allowing people to be a lot more flexible. And coming back to your comment, Josh, where only 10% of people were actually remote, even though everybody was saying, oh, we're super flexible, right? It will actually be kind of a fluid workforce now. You might even see things like, just guest cubes where I come in and I don't have a permanent cube, I just have a guest cube where I work. But from a security, okay, that's all office design, HR stuff, let's leave that. From a security point of view, it effectively means that everybody's roaming, right? You now have to, and again, this is where I think even if people come back into the office, the design, the security design principles that we've will stick with us. That's a good thing in my opinion, right? This steps towards zero trust, towards segmented access. Like, why should you have permanent access via VPN to everything? You should have access that is specific and that is re-authenticated regularly, so that if your permanently vulnerable machine it gets compromised, then the compromise window, the dwell window, or the opportunity time is only limited for the attacker to a limited time before they have to re-authenticate with your stolen credentials. And their attack surface is minimal. It's only like 5 or 6 services that you had access to. So I think in a way, even if people don't literally continue working from home all the time, which sooner or later will come back to normal, from a security perspective, if you just kind of ignore what's going on in physical space and look only at the kind of network and cyberspace, it'll look as if people are working from home. We're going to have continuous authentication, software-defined perimeter, VPN access, right? Even if and that's kind of coming back to these examples. There will be no more crunchy outside and gooey inside, right? Everything's going to be considered crunchy, cooked all the way through, right? And then in your castle example, I guess it's like everything's a moat. It'll become Venice.
Yeah, I mean, because you have to think about this. Wouldn't it be better from a security perspective to say, okay, we're always going to be perimeterless, even if people are inside our brick and mortar building, behind our firewall? Because otherwise, you're essentially running 2 different security programs at all times. Right? You're running a work from home, but when that person comes in, there's now a different security program. If you don't take the time to actually think about it and design out a new security architecture, a network architecture, a security program, processes, security awareness for an entirely different organization now that has people that constantly work remote, but sometimes hybrid, sometimes in the office, you're essentially running 2, if not 3 different security practices at all time, which it's difficult enough to have one good security practice.
That's
let
a
alone
recipe for
running.
disaster.
Yeah, I mean, it's a disaster.
Yeah.
So, product fatigue's on there. I talk about that a lot. You and I do too. It's there's just so many products out there, right? And I know that SonicWall sells products, and I'm not banging on anybody else that sells products. I mean, everybody has great products, but I talk to customers that I shared this again that a couple months ago I was talking to somebody, and they were talking about security, what they should be adding to their network, and they're like, well, I had this IDS IPS box that I bought 2.5 years ago, and it's literally still sitting underneath my desk, and I've just never had time to get it installed because they have so many products. If we would really just go back to keep it simple, patching, vulnerability scanning, making sure you have your updates, good network segmentation. I'm jumping ahead again. We'll talk about some security best practices, but if we would just do that stuff, then there wouldn't be so much product fatigue. And talking to customers and other peers, like they're hearing that and they're feeling that as well, that there's just so much stuff out there that they can't deploy it, they can't educate themselves on it. And there's just too much stuff in the industry right now. And I'm not saying that it's not good products. I'm just saying there's just so much to do that's really difficult for us as practitioners and then for consumers to really put their arms around it. I mean, do you have quick
feature request received? No, but you're 100% correct in that. And I, as a product guy, right, we see that too. We see that, and that's part of what drives consolidation of products. If we scroll back 15 years ago, the whole UTM thing, and then every now and then a new product category will pop up, and always the question as a product and as a strategy person, whenever there's a new technology, my first question is, will this become a feature on everything that already exists, or will this become a new pillar and a new product that my customers are going to have to start buying, right? And then we constantly look, for example, at and I'm just taking the SonicWall perspective. This is a broader, you're pointing out an absolutely correct broader issue, but I just want to say this resonates even inside the vendors, right? Where you're constantly looking and saying, how can we consolidate and reduce the number of the whole single pane of glass management, right, conversation, and how can we reduce the number of consoles that people have to log into? This goes even to log alerting or security event monitoring, right? If you have to log into 5 consoles, that's it, game over, right? You're only going to log into 1 or 2 and then try to keep up there. So you're absolutely right. This is a problem in the industry, and that's another one of those things that will continue to happen. And hopefully that consolidation continues to continue. But this is also one of the big drivers behind the technology that you'll start seeing being more and more broadly adopted over the next probably 5 years. Gartner calls it SASE, Secure Access Service Edge, and think of it as let me give you a customer problem. Like this is how I articulate it inside our company is you might have an organization that has half the people working from home, half the people working in some office, and then they acquired another company that had completely different networking equipment. If you're a security person in charge of all of that, how can you guarantee that everybody has the same security level across the company? You can't. Right. It's like the people in the office that you acquired have different equipment. So now you have to kind of grok the security posture of that equipment and of their laptops or devices. Compare that to what you have. Compare that to what you have in a data center versus people working remotely. That becomes a nightmare. So this is where you start pushing everybody via an endpoint and a WireGuard or VPN tunnel to a cloud layer where there's a broker, right? And then from that broker, you either layer additional security levels, or from that broker, you then let people go out to the internet or to the private cloud or to the private network. But you as an admin then log into only one place, and you set the policy in that one place, both access policies, securities policies, things like that. And by the way, I'm not pitching a product to you right now. I'm talking about a vision. This is where the industry is kind of headed. Not that the on-prem products will go away. The on-prem products will become part of that architecture and that infrastructure where you have clients and physical appliances connecting to a layer, and the security orchestration will start happening in that layer. And the primary driver there is to simplify administration and security posture so that you can wake up on a Monday and know that everybody in your company has the same exact security posture. It doesn't matter where they are, what they're behind.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I envision as in like I shrink a SonicWall and I stick it on everybody's laptop, right? And then that every one of those mini little SonicWalls that's running on a laptop is then controlled at a higher level in the cloud from the broker. And now it doesn't matter where you're at, you're still getting the same corporate policy. You're still getting the same AV, the same role access that we can control from a very high level. I don't want to leave this slide without, and I know that we're, shocker, we're being long-winded here, but I don't want to leave this slide without talking about zero trust, because you and I have shared many opinions about this, and a lot of times I'm probably going to state a very unpopular opinion for some of our peers in the industry. The term zero trust to me, I feel like, is overused. I like the idea behind it. I understand it. I get it. I can get behind the idea of it. But zero trust for most organizations, and let's think about this, 95% of all businesses in the United States are small to medium-sized businesses. They're not enterprises, right? So zero trust for the majority of businesses is not even something that they can attain in the next 3 to 4 years, right? Most businesses are struggling with, what AV do I use? Am I managing my firewall the right way? Am I using proper network segmentation internally? Do I have good backups? They're still struggling with the basics to be able to do that, let alone be pushed into zero trust, which, again, great idea. Like you mentioned earlier, it's not a product, it's not a piece of software. It's really somewhat of a vision, right, of what you should be doing, which is making people authenticate at all points in times, not giving people always on VPN that gives them access to the entire network. So that's my probably unpopular opinion on that. In very short, I could talk about zero trust for 30 minutes. What's your 2-minute take on, really my take on zero trust?
It'll require, fundamentally it'll require kind of, redesign of networks. And again, I think in general, zero trust is a good principle to follow. It'll absolutely not be possible to flip to that overnight. It's a journey, right? The quicker we can get to that journey, to the destination, the better. But yanking somebody there overnight is also, there's a comment, and I want to also riff on the fact that if security becomes cumbersome and people are not used to it, they'll find ways around it, right? It also can't get in their way. But in general, I'm a fan of zero trust. It just has to be consumable by humans, and like the system cannot reject it.
Right. It's not a silver bullet, right?
Exactly.
I mean, I feel like in a lot of the marketing stuff, it's pitched as a silver bullet.
It's the latest word. It is the latest word. Every few years, the security industry latches onto a new word. That's just the nature of it, right? It's right. The latest word.
Well, let's jump in here to the your threat findings, some of the SonicWall cyber threat report.
Yeah, there are a few, we covered a lot, and I will highlight just a few things. We saw that ransomware last year. So just as a level set again for everyone, we look at our threat research, we look at all the telemetry that comes in from from the devices, from the endpoints, from honeypots, et cetera, from all the sensors that we have, and we aggregate at the end of the year, we aggregate a view of what we saw last year. And last year was obviously, weird, but there was some interesting and some obvious and some less obvious takeaways. So ransomware just ran rampant, and ransomware, and also the other piece of malware that made a massive comeback was cryptojacking. I assume everybody's keeping track of the conversion ratio between, for example, Bitcoin and US dollar. It went up to touched 61,000 or something like that. Now I think it's at 55,000. I think a year ago it was in the 15,000s level. So whenever cryptocurrency prices go up, that makes crypto mining feasible and profitable, meaning that it's now actually worth to burn electricity, which is a whole different social issue. But crypto mining is back, and ransomware is back. Now, what's interesting is these two are up in our report, despite the overall level of malware that we observed being down, because there are fewer people behind firewalls. So, there's just less traffic there. So let me give you an analogy of what that means. The stock market is down 60%, but there are two stocks that are up 60% each, right? So the overall ransomware, the overall malware volume went down overall from a volume perspective. And yet during that downturn, cryptocurrency and ransomware went massively up, and they'll continue to exist. If you can flip forward, Josh. We talked about IoT attacks, ransomware, cryptojacking. Let's go forward a little bit. I want to focus in on ransomware. So as the attacks continue to go up, we also saw that they're targeting certain verticals. Next slide. I actually want to zoom in on. Yeah, there we go. Retail saw a 365% increase. Healthcare, 123% increase, and government 20% increase. So it's a lot more targeted. And if you think about why, right, the tactics of ransomware actors have also changed over the past 1.5 years. So the new tactics are, and we saw this starting probably like late 2019, but it really picked up in early 2020, was besides just keeping the data locked, they would also exfiltrate the data and then use that as a lever against the company by basically threatening to start releasing the data to and triggering various, breach notification, brand damage, whatever, GDPR triggers, effectively pushing the company to pay. Now, if you think about like who are the organizations that are most susceptible to like any company that's losing money every day, their networks are down, retail, right, are very likely to pay ransoms. Healthcare, extremely sensitive to data leakage, right? They're willing to pay. And the government focus there is more like local government, where you've got a lot of juicy data, a lot of private data, tax records, health records, not health, I'm sorry, like property records, tax records, etc. But at the same time, it's a lot of private data. And at the same time, they're not as well resourced as like, major banks and things. So that's what we saw with ransomware. That's not going to go away until cryptocurrency prices come down again, because it's I actually don't think it's going to go away for a while. Next slide, please.
You bring up something good there. Here's a thought. Would ransomware drastically decrease if there was no cryptocurrency?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Because it relies on, and I'm not, this is not a knock on cryptocurrency.
Yeah, I'm not going there. Yeah.
Enables, right? It's anonymous. Ransomware is only possible with anonymous payments. You
right,
take away the ability to make anonymous payments, that problem goes away. It's too dangerous then.
Just something to think about for everybody that's on here. Again, we're not trying to scare anybody. We just love to give information to people. But by the time this talk's over, there will be over 500 businesses that have suffered ransomware. Just today, during this hour-and-a-half talk, over 500 businesses. The average is every 10 seconds, there is somebody that is a business that gets hit with ransomware. So.
Yeah, the other thing that we saw, and let me actually touch up on, there's a question in the field, there's lots of companies using, well, I'll actually talk in the multiple VPN solutions separately, but there's one great question. If we had time only to focus on one security related item this month. So in other words, great conversation, Dmitry and Josh, but if there's one thing that I take away, if you told me one piece of advice when I hang up, what should I do? I 100% agree with Josh, multi-factor authentication. And I'm saying that as a vendor that does not sell multi-factor authentication, okay? Like, please, on everything that you have, on your infrastructure, on your cloud accounts, on your private accounts, and by private accounts, I literally mean your Gmail accounts, your Amazon accounts, anything sensitive, please turn on multi-factor authentication. And while I'm on my soapbox, I'll also say, please use password managers and don't reuse passwords.
Hey, I've got the best password manager right here.
Oh, I thought it was going to be sticky notes.
It's a little password book, right? I mean, isn't that what everybody should carry in their pocket? Right? I saw this at a store like 5 years ago, and I'm like, this cannot exist.
You're like, is this a gag gift or is this?
So I bought it.
Yeah.
So.
But again, I mean, I'm literally saying this as a vendor who does not sell password managers, who does not sell multi-factor authentication. I implore everyone to turn on multi-factor authentication, use password managers, and don't reuse your passwords, right? That's the most important. Then we can get into patching, endpoint, all that other stuff. Like, you get the biggest bang for the buck right now with MFA and reuse pass. And part of the reason for that is with the increased cloud usage adoption, I don't need to break through your firewall or through your VPN or whatever. You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to harvest credentials. I'm going to steal people's credentials. And if I have your credentials and you don't have multi-factor authentication, that's it. I'm in. Your password. I think I said this last year, Josh. Your security now, your perimeter is, if you don't have multi-factor authentication, is your least security conscious person's username and password. Then they're in.
And then even to go one step further, it's the security question, right? Because most people still answer those, hey, Dmitry, what high school did you go to?
I know.
Hey, Dmitry,
Oh, it's on Facebook.
Right, it's on Facebook, right?
What state do you live in?
Right. People answer that seriously and honestly, and then that causes an even bigger issue because now I can very quickly reset your password and I'm in.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
And this is where you're absolutely right. I mean, we're going down into the weeds, but these are very important weeds. For all those security questions, I have like fake answers that I just memorized that I give, like car. No, that's not the car that I actually had. City? Nope, definitely not where I was, born. But if I stay consistent, you can scrape my Facebook, my LinkedIn, all you want. You're not going to guess the answers to that. But anyway, we digress. Coming back to this, the other thing, we talked about this last year, the Office documents continue to be weaponized. Pay attention to Office documents. Everybody now knows not to click on executables that come in unsolicited. I don't think they can even land in mailboxes anymore. But receiving Office documents, and what I mean by that is PDFs or Excel files, that's still a thing. A lot of phishing, a lot of credential harvesting campaigns work like this. It's a PDF invoice for a large shipment that is being held up in customs and everybody's expecting some large shipment. You open up that asks you to authenticate, and it puts up some sort of or it takes you to a web page that looks like a Microsoft or an Adobe login page. You type in your credentials and then it says, error, and redirects you to a real Adobe or Microsoft page. You think, oh, I must have mistyped my password. You try again, but by this time your credentials are already stolen. That's one of the examples. The other one is to deliver malware, but watch out for weaponized documents. Let's keep going, Josh. We talked about cryptojacking. Let's keep on moving, and we talked about IT malware. We kind of jumped ahead. This is what I was talking about in terms of top signatures. We saw, I started off the discussion on home routers, on these consumer grade Linksys devices being exploited. And you can see the D-Link, Zycel, TP-Link, it's routers and cameras, the worst offenders, out there. So yeah, let's keep going. We talked about Shodan Safari. I want to get to I want to make sure we have time for Q&A.
Yeah,
Josh, you want to take this one?
Yeah, so I'll just hit, best practices. This is, typically, we do a little poll of, hey, what do you want to hear Josh and Dmitry talk about? And there's always two things. Hey, we want to do Q&A, so we're going to fly through this to try to give people some Q&A. But then also it's security best practices. So I just listed out in no particular order really, but something that I even threw in the chat there when the question was, hey, if I could do something in the next month, like what would it be? And MFA, we agree on that. That's the most important. But to me as well, if you can slow down enough to do some data identification, and what I mean by that is, a lot of times I'll talk to businesses and they'll say, well, Josh, I have nothing of interest. Nobody wants anything from me. I don't have intellectual property. I don't store credit card data. Well, no, but you have employees, right? Yeah, well, you probably onboarded them and now you have an application that has social security information. You have first name, last name, address, email address, phone number. Like, you have data, you have customer data too. And a lot of times they don't even know where that exists. So you have to do data identification and figure out what is the data that you have that is of importance and where does it exist. So then you can basically build, the crunchy outside, or you can build the castle around that data and put in roles and responsibilities around that. People need to move to a next generation endpoint, whether that's, you want to call it machine learning or artificial intelligence, but there's a lot of different products out there on the market today. SentinelOne, there's Silence out there. Like, you need to move towards that off of a signature-based AV. So I would implore everybody to take a look at that. Control admins, right? You don't want to give people a local admin or domain admin. You should not be running if you're a network administrator, your normal log on. If it's, Joshua, .s, I should not be logging on as domain admin every single day. I should have my own separate domain admin. I shouldn't have local admin rights to my own computer. I should have to then type that back in. most of these executables that you could potentially download that are malicious are going to require you to have administrative rights to run. If you don't grant them that access, then they can never run in the first place. Vulnerability management, patch management, we've talked about that ad nauseum, but I'm a firm believer in what's called continuous vulnerability management. I have not coined that term, but I'm telling you that it's coming and we need to be looking at that. Same with patch management, something we talk about, Dmitriy hit on a little bit, but that's like the lesser evil. What is worse? Patching in production a vulnerability and you break prod, or not even patching a vulnerability and now somebody gets in. There's some balance of a risk assessment, a risk analysis that you have to do from a business perspective to say, what is my risk of somebody actually getting this vulnerability? From a Hafnium perspective, that was like a patch immediately because, again, as Dmitriy touched on, we can't just say, hey, everybody give me your IP address that you're going to come from when you want to get to the Exchange server. It doesn't work that way, right? It has to be open to the internet. But now if you have something internally that might be segmented that, is vulnerable, you don't necessarily have to run off and patch that immediately. You can burn that in a dev environment and test it. But that's not always going to be the case. So you do have to weigh that. There is some risk analysis there, but we really need to be mindful of that.
Josh, if I may jump
Yeah,
in,
go ahead.
my kind of rule of thumb is if it's internet facing and it deals with credentials, it deals with authentication, it has keys to the kingdom, patch it immediately. Like, just don't look back, patch it immediately. If it's a VPN system, if it's Exchange, if it's web servers don't really deal. Web servers are obviously sensitive, they're internet facing, but they don't typically hold the keys to the kingdom, right? So therefore they're on a different tier. They're whole different strategies for patching web servers, and especially if you're using containers, there's a whole mentality of, are they pets or are they a herd? In other words, you take careful care of your pets. Those are your servers, special servers. And then you have cattle, where you just cattle, you have a farm of cattle and you don't really care about any individual one. So web servers are a different thing, but things like Exchange, VPN servers, anything that grants access, anything that has admin, that can be exploited for further access, patch immediately. Like, that's a no-brainer.
I 100% agree with that. And also then jump over to the right, network segmentation. Anything that's public facing needs to be in its own network zone that's isolated away with very limited to no access to anything else internally. Because if I can pound on it from it externally and then I get in, you should make it very hard, if not impossible, for somebody to jump from that device into someplace else in the network. So make sure you have really good network segmentation. Firewall management, making sure you have good firewall management policies in place, making sure that you just don't open up any inbound to a server because you're really not sure how to do it, and or you're not sure what port you need at that point in time. Also outbound ACLs. I think back last year or 2 years ago, the SonicWall cyber threat report said that 20% of all breaches were because of outbound ports that were open, right? We need to make sure we're doing a better job with that. And that kind of comes in a cyclical thing. It used to be lockdown ports, and it was now just focused on applications. Now it's back to lockdown ports, right? Don't make anything easy on the hacker. Make it difficult. If you make it difficult, most times they're going to go away, right? I look at it like, if you lock your door at night, and there was some stat, a couple years ago that locked doors basically basically reduce burglaries by 95%. What that means is that, out of 100 times, 95 times somebody comes up and they wiggle the door and they see the door's locked, they just walk away. So if you do the easy things and quote unquote, lock your doors, most times people are just going to walk away from your network because they're just going to move on to something else that's easy. Go to shodan.io, type in remote desktop. You'll see right now there's almost 4 million open RDP sessions in the world right now. No naked RDP. I know this just kills Dmitriy. No naked RDP. Anything that's going to be remote access, again, Shodan, 4 million open RDP servers out there that you can get into, or desktops. VPN for anything remote access. Do you want to talk on that, or you just?
No,
like
that's
I don't know. So I feel like we've talked ad nauseum on.
Yeah. There was another topic. Just keep going. I'll come back to one of the things that you said. I want to.
Yeah, add external to the stamp of your email. It seems very simple. There's a 50% less likelihood that somebody will actually succumb to a phishing attack if external is added to emails. Almost any email system can do that today. Make sure you do that. If you're a larger organization, make sure you're doing a monthly review of your directory services like Active Directory. A lot of times hacks happen because somebody leaves or there's a stale account that gets left out there, and maybe you have a services account that you unfortunately gave too much access to, and then you click the little button that says, don't require me to reset password, and it's 5 years later and that service account gets popped and you never know about it. So larger organizations do a monthly review. That can even be tied into HR when an employee leaves. If you're smaller organizations, at least do a quarterly review. Again, they'll help make it an HR function. And then user role management. That kind of goes back to the zero trust stuff that we're talking about. You know, I'm talking really quickly about this stuff, but user role management is making sure that if Dmitri's a developer, he doesn't need access to the confidential shared drive that has access into payroll and everything else. So make sure that you're using proper user role management so employees only have access to the things that they need. And a lot of times in businesses, what happens is you fire up a username, you add some people to some groups, you walk away, and accidentally people have access to way too much stuff than what they need to do their normal day-to-day job. You had a comment, Dmitriy?
Yeah, you said about making removing the easy access. For that analogy, I like to use the joke where two guys run into a bear in the woods, and one of them starts tying his shoelaces, and the other one says, "What are you doing? Like, we got to get away." And he's like, "Yeah, I just have to outrun you." Right? It's the same thing with security. It's if SVR or if any of the groups that have panda or bear in their name want to get in, they'll get in. Just sorry, but what you don't want is you don't want the script kiddies, the copycats, the opportunists that are looking for some Bitcoin or for some info that are just downloading scripts, running it. They read about they watched a video or they read on a forum how to do this. They're trying it out. Those are the ones that you don't want to fall a victim to those. Even the more sophisticated ones that might tailor it a little bit, but they're not at the level of sophistication of, again, the pandas and the bears. That's what a lot of what Josh said is it removes that, it just raises the bar where it's not you, right? The MFA, we talked about that. The external stamp to email, such a stupidly easy thing to do. And yet it has so much ROI because when people are just on autopilot looking at their email, and by the way, I can spoof the email to come from whoever I want it to come from. Like I can put an email in your inbox from, you tell me who you want it to be from, I'll put it in there, right? And it'll look legit until you open up the headers. And that's what that stamp will do, is it'll say it's from the CEO of the company, but it's an external email, right? That already makes people take a pause and think about what they're about to do. Josh, a lot of what you talked about, users and auditing the directory services or not sharing like admin passwords and admin, that all falls under the category of privileged account management, right? Your privileged account, again, think of that chaos monkey principle, right? Take your favorite admin, not Josh, right? But take your favorite admin and tomorrow he leaves in disgust and he's angry and whatever, right? What's your damage, right? A worst case scenario, San Francisco had this incident, right? Where an admin locks out the network. Can they do that? Right? What sort of just use those principles of like chaos monkey from not only from a technology point of view but also from human. If you have the same shared password between 5 different people for administering a device and somebody screws something up or somebody whatever becomes a bad actor, an insider, right? Can you tell who it was? Or do they have plausible deniability now because it was a shared password, right? So those are the things. Anyway, that's a separate webinar on privileged account management.
Yeah,
let's get into the fun stuff.
Yeah, so we're going to real quick, we're going to do 5 minutes here, and we'll do what keeps us up at night, what we're optimistic about. But what I would say is, if you have questions right now, go ahead and start putting them in Q&A, and we'll start answering them as soon as we get through this. So Dmitriy, what keeps you up at night?
All right. Last year, I talked about supply chain. I'll break it up into short-term and long-term. Supply chain continues to keep me up at night. And again, I will say, look at your taskbar in the bottom right. And if I was a bad guy, that's what I would be exploiting. Like if I turn bad tomorrow and I want to make some Bitcoin, I'm going to start targeting utilities that people use. So keep out there. On the long term, this is more of like, let's start inoculating the public. This really scares me at a social level and at a technical level. So those two people, here, exercise for the listeners, open up a browser window, and go to the website. It's a safe website, I promise. Go to a website called thispersondoesnotexist.com and keep refreshing. I have 2 screenshots on here. These people do not exist. These people are AI generated. There are similar, there's another website that I have on there. This X does not exist, because the group that use these adversarial generative networks, they created a number of websites. This company does not exist. This resume does not exist. This rental listing does not exist. This art does not exist, right? You can do all these different things. It's really fun and also really scary. So deep fakes are right now, they're in that kind of, they got introduced to what, 3-4 years ago. Now they're getting to the point where it's almost like you can download tools, or there are websites that'll help you do it and insert a face, but you can still clearly tell that they're fake. There are some that are getting into that uncanny valley, and uncanny valley is in robotics and in basically, anyway, in robotics there was a term, I forgot the guy who coined the term, but he said robotics, they get closer and closer and closer to being humanoid, but you can still tell that they're robots. And then there's an uncanny valley, and that valley is where they're close enough, but something's uncanny. You're like, something's weird. It's not really a human, but like I'm very uncomfortable because I can't clearly classify it as a robot, but I can't classify it as a human, right? So we're in that uncanny valley, but over the next several years, it's going to get really, really good. And the fact that it gets really, really good is really, really scary to me, because you're going to be able to see content and people, like these people do not exist, right? I can create profiles for them. I can create rental listings. I can create resumes. And I put that in the bottom, the social media provides the rapid spread, and then deep fakes provide the content, and then disinformation is intent, and that's going to create pain. And that's, I see this as both a societal thing, and also this is going to go into cybersecurity and into phishing, into business email compromise. I mean, the possibility, I kind of get excited about the possibilities, and then I immediately get scared, right? Because how do you counter that at machine speed? And how do you, so the reason why I'm sharing that right now is, let's start inoculating people against this. Let's make people aware that this is coming, so that when it does come, it's not they don't get blindsided by this. That's all from me, Josh.
Yeah, so that's great. I worry about the deep fake stuff. Even now, it kind of dives into mine from a short term, is that I feel like technology, for me, what scares me is it's outpaced the consumer. And it probably outpaced the consumer a number of years ago, but it's just getting worse. What I mean by that is technology, let's even, well, a good example, probably just a couple months ago, I was at the grocery store. Finally got out of the house, was running over to pick up some groceries, and there was an older gentleman there, probably in his 60s, 70s, struggling to use the credit card. He didn't understand how to use the chip credit card. It just would not work for him. So I went over and helped him use his credit card. And that, again, just made me think that something as simple that most of us take for granted that we know how to use, right? I go back to my grandparents saying, hey, the VCR's flashing 12, right? Can you come down and fix this? Now it's in our everyday lives. It has much larger impact, which could be positive or negative. A simple thing of how to use a credit card, or now people carry around these things, right? I mean, our cell phones, they're mini computers, and they have hundreds of apps on them sometimes that people might not even know what they do or what's going on in the background. And now this stuff's going to go into their homes. And what I mean by that is 5G. Gave a talk about that a while ago, but 5G is going to come, and I guarantee you that once it's available, Dmitriy is going to have a refrigerator that's going to shoot him a push notification that tells him that he needs to go pick up milk.
No, there are some things that should stay dumb. I'm sorry.
But that's going to happen, right? I mean, those refrigerators have already actually been created, and that actually already works, but it's just going to get worse. They're developing washing machines and drying machines that are going to tell you and send you push notifications when your laundry's done. Like, is that needed really? I don't know, but consumers are going to eat that up, but they're not going to understand the technology, and they're going to have no ability to apply patches to these devices that don't have security built into them. So that's my short-term concern. Long-term now is, and we're already starting to face this in the industry, is that the technology is going to outpace the practitioner. We talked about product fatigue already. What I mean by that is, in the last 12 to 24 months, there's been close to 1 million job openings for IT or security professionals, and they believe by 2025 that's going to push upwards of 4 million people. People like SonicWall. I'm not knocking on anybody. I want to use this as an example. they do such a great job of pushing out products so quickly that now, though, the practitioner can't keep up with the product. And that's a good thing. It's a bad thing, right? Because they're putting out products, many of these vendors that provide a great benefit, but people can't stay up to speed on how to use these products effectively and efficiently, how to configure them properly. I mean, there's many times that we log into firewalls for customers that somebody else configured or installed their firewall, and there's an any rule allowing everything in. And the reason why they did that was because they know how to use technology, but they don't understand the security access around it. That's my really big fear for our industry, is that the technology is getting created so quickly that we're not going to be able to keep up with it and understand how things work. There's been new products recently, not from SonicWall, from other vendors that I've run into, that the product comes out, I reach out to the product manager or even maybe a higher level executive and say, hey, where's the KB document on this? Where's the admin guide? Like, we're looking for this. Well, that actually doesn't exist yet. Like, we're working on it. So you're putting on the shelf a product that has no user guide. So think about that. And that happens more than what you think. And it's going to get worse as we get further and further into 75 million or billion devices connected to the internet. So Dmitry, what are you optimistic about?
In the short term, I'm optimistic about broad MFA adoption. I think people are waking up. And there's MFA again. At a kind of strategic level, cybersecurity is starting to enter political and social consciousness. And what I mean by that is I actually encourage people to look into there was a cyberspace solarium commission. You can download the report. A lot of policy that's driven by the US government is a lot of the advice is coming out from that. There was a lot of really good advice in that commission. It starts kind of with a scary scenario of what can happen, IoT, water plants, water treatment plants being misused. And what's funny is that was published in March, and then last September we had an example of or it was December in Florida, there was a water pump or water treatment plant that was misused. But the US government is starting to take cybersecurity more seriously. There's now I think there's an appointment at the cabinet level for cybersecurity. So that's good, right? And that means, and I trust that once a topic enters consciousness and once the weight of United States, either political or investment or capital system gets put behind something, there's a lot of innovation that's going to come out of that. And so the fact that it's now on the table, it's an issue on the table, not the security guy who's like nagging everyone by tapping them on the shoulder, that's a good thing. I think there'll be positives outcome. It might take a while, there'll probably be missteps, but it's a positive step in the right direction. And finally, everybody's scared of ransomware. So it means, again, it's awareness. I'm happy about the awareness. In the long term, what I'm optimistic about is tools like XDR, EDR, SOAR, extended detection response, things like that basically bring response to cyber attacks or to cyber incidents to be at the machine level speed. Because I right now can write attacks as an attacker. I can create attack chains that operate at machine level speed, meaning that I exploit. As soon as I exploit, I scan, I discover what I want, I run another exploit, I scan. That might take 10 minutes. A human, if they're lucky to get that alert for the first exploit or for the first scan while they're looking at the monitor, will not be able to respond in that time. So there are tools that are now starting to build up to be able to respond to things in machine time. That basically automates a lot of what Josh was talking about, the shortage of people, et cetera, in a way that'll be ameliorated by the automation at the management and the response level. Now, again, there will be a lot of missteps there, and we'll have to learn a lot. It's, not knocking Tesla here, just as an example, they're blazing a way forward, but there are missteps like with the autopilot and things like that. That's going to be kind of where we will be, but net, it'll be a positive movement. Cloud-based security services everywhere with SASE stuff. I talked about SASE, you push it all up. A lot of that product fatigue goes away, and zero trust adoption, again, that's a mentality, that's not a product, but the more there is that you don't need to access things that you don't need to access, the more that'll reduce the potential impact. Think of it as like the blast zone. the more it reduces the blast zone. When you don't have any baffles, when you don't have any internal segmentation, the blast zone is fully internal when you get into that GUI center or inside the castle. The more you have segmentation, the more you have zero trust and limited access, the more the blast zone of an attack gets more compartmentalized. And I'm making analogies from kinetic space to cyberspace, but they are very, very relevant here. Josh, back to you.
Yeah, that's great, man. So it's interesting. We kind of built these slides separately, but we hit on a lot of the same things. So to me, short term is for me, it's great that I feel like cybersecurity is actually on the mind of almost everybody, right? And that's in the private sector, that's in the professional, that's in all businesses, that's in government. I feel like it's here and it's here to stay now, where before it seemed like a fad and a trend that we would talk about cybersecurity. It's on everybody's mind now because of everything that's happening in the world. MFA is no longer a fad, right? It's not something that you do to try to be a little bit more secure. It's a requirement. And detection is trending up. And what I mean by that is, and you hit on that a little bit with the XDR stuff, but that is, we always talked about layered defense or defense in depth, right? So my new thing has been, it's layered defense plus detection. Like that's for me, like don't give up the layered defense part of it. Like we need that. But the reality is, I said earlier, we have to be right 100% of the time and have to be right once. So what do you do on that one time where you're wrong? Well, now you have to have some detection. And we've seen detection is actually trending up. And I think in the long term, even for me, to jump down to my 3-year is that layered defense plus detection plus remediation from an XDR standpoint. We launched XDR this past October internally for a lot of our customers. The take rate has been unbelievable. We're building such a large backlog of people that really want to latch onto our XDR system. And it's been great because now we're able to build that layered defense. We're able to supply detection for them by aggregating all of these logs. And, hey, Dmitriy at 3 o'clock in the morning, logged onto this machine that he hasn't logged onto ever. But he also logged in using credentials that, seemed to be somewhat stale. And then he started to exfiltrate data to an IP address that he's never done. Like that pops an alert. Rather than that just being 3 separate log entries, it's creating one alert that says, hey, all these things are happening. Dmitri's doing something that's not really normal. But to drive that further, the 3-year is going to be the remediation of that. Hey, these 3 things happen. It has a criticality ranking. Go ahead and just knock Dmitriy offline right now until somebody wakes up and goes and takes a look at this, right?
Or have him re-authenticate with his 2-factor authentication in order to continue.
Yep, that's where we're trending to. And I feel like 3 years from now, we're going to be a lot more passwordless from now. I think that's actually going to happen. We're already starting to see that trend with a lot more like biometric stuff that's going to come into play. Passwords are really going to die. They have to. There you go. There he is.
And I'm not a vendor for this. I'm just saying, and this is the future.
Yep. And then continuous vulnerability scanning. I've talked about it ad nauseum, but I believe that's it. I believe that we need to scan continuously. And I don't mean like once a week or, do our quarterly vuln scans. I'm talking about a system that is continuously scanning externally, internally, and popping alerts every time there's a vulnerability. It's getting sent to somebody, and then they're being told, what should you do to remediate this? If not also, even let's look at it from a firewall. A network administrator opens up an inbound port to a server. He doesn't realize that that port actually has a vulnerability and that server is vulnerability and needs patched. When that firewall gets the request to open up the NAT policy and the rule, the firewall automatically scans the server and comes back and says, hey, there's actually a vulnerability on this server. You're getting ready to take this action and open it up to the world. Are you sure you want to do this? Like that is going to happen. Businesses and people like SonicWall, they're going to be building stuff like this that's just going to protect you. Again, 90% of breaches happen because of something that had a patch was not patched. So why not, from a vendor standpoint, go ahead and help protect people with the knowledge that we have. So that's where I feel like we're going to be.
All right. Shall we open it up to questions?
Yep, Q&A. Does anybody have Q&A here?
I think there are a few that we should catch up on while people are typing. We covered a lot of different things. Hopefully that provoked some. Hopefully you can walk away with some tangible actions right now. with some things that educate you about short term and some thought-provoking stuff for the future that we'll unfortunately we'll be revisiting in the upcoming years, because some of the stuff will become reality. There was one earlier question. Let me address it. So speaking of work from home, there are some companies that have multiple remote access solutions, and the main one is used by main staff, and then the different departments use their favorite ones. This is where we go into shadow IT and different departments running their own thing. That's an organizational issue, and that's a horrible thing, because you want to have, for compliance, for just your own peace of mind, you want to have one type of access. I mean, maybe you have two as a backup, right? But it's company-wide. It's a policy. You don't let people run their own things. If you want for content, I don't have anything specific that you can, off the top of my head, that you can show management, but I have a parallel for you to share. If you look at Gartner research, and this is something that they've been repeating, and I 100% agree, and I've observed over the past 5 years, they've been talking about cloud security, and that in cloud security, we're soon going to reach a position where 99% of security breaches in the cloud are users' fault. Meaning that it's not the cloud is very, very secure itself. The infrastructure that Amazon, Google, Azure, Microsoft have built up is more secure than anything that we can, that any other company can build up. They spend billions on security. So where we're getting is to a position where it's the user usage of those tools that becomes the problem, and that creates interesting, kind of liability questions also when there is a breach. But there is a similar thing for VPN and remote access, where I would say that if you're not using, if you have that sprawl, the reason why I brought up that analogy is basically it's going to come down to now compliance and proper usage rather than the core security of the technology itself. And I thought of that when you were asking about different departments implementing their own VPN. This is where you get into a compliance conversation, and rather than the core security of each of one of those individual products. So I think that's a behavioral management problem that, I would just smack him over the head with compliance as much as you can without getting fired. There was another question about MFA for Wi-Fi. So if we think about MFA, multi-factor or two-factor authentication, it's what what you have. I think there's a third one, but the best example that I can think of for, so there are two ways that you can handle MFA for Wi-Fi. You either set up a login portal where everybody has to authenticate kind of to guest Wi-Fi, sort of the zero trust principle where there is no internal Wi-Fi network. Everybody's a guest. But if you're a guest and you get a portal and you want to log in, you log in, and then you'll have to open up a VPN tunnel or you authenticate to get internal access, then you can obviously just use regular off-the-shelf MFA tools. The other way, the way to ensure that internal Wi-Fi is protected is by taking advantage of the principle of what you have. And there's an authentication scheme for Wi-Fi that relies on certificates in addition to password, right? So for example, if I steal Josh's credentials for Cerdant, I could, if he just has basic password-based authentication for his Wi-Fi, I can sneak into the Cerdant office and authenticate as Josh to the Wi-Fi. Maybe Josh, you guys have additional security, but if you also have a certificate on the device that's required, then I can't do that off of my laptop. I will also have to have Josh's laptop.
Yeah, so there's a couple options there too, depending on what vendor you have. Obviously you have certificate based at that point in time. Depending on the Wi-Fi, you can even leverage token based from RSA.
Yeah.
But then also there's a private pre-shared key that you can use as well, meaning that, and this is what we're big advocates of, is that every employee for employee wireless actually has their own private key. So now think about this. We have employee Wi-Fi, employee decides to leave. Well, you're 300 employees. Now you have to update 300 laptops with a new private key. Not if each employee has their own private key. Now I can just kill that key, and it's attached to their device and or two devices. So you have multi-factor that way. I'd be looking at that depending on what type of Wi-Fi system that you have at that point in time. There's a good question there about, is MFA over cellular messages secure as something like Google App or Google Authenticator? It's not.
It's not.
I would tell you So there's a difference between two-factor authentication and multi-factor authentication. A lot of times, I'm not going to get into differences, but look them up. There is a good difference. If you only have the choice of doing it cellular message, do cellular message, right? If you have the option of like a one-time text message and you have the option of an app, use the app. It is more secure at that point in time. But please note, MFA to a cell phone can be hacked. It is very difficult to do. Go look up SIM swap if you want, right? SIM swapping, it happens. But anything's better than nothing. If you can only do 2FA, which is a text message, a one-time password to a cell phone, even to an email address, please do that. But most times anymore, Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator, Duo, it'll support almost anything that you actually log into.
I just want to comment on that, Josh, real quick. The SIM hack attack, the reason why that one, why I emphatically say yes, please use Google or Duo or Microsoft Authenticator instead of text messages, is the SIM swapping attack is not a technically difficult thing. It's a social engineering thing. Like all I need to do is just find a friendly employee at Verizon or AT&T who is going to do this, and maybe they're part of my ring. Right? It's a social thing. It's not a technical. I mean, there is a technical factor there as well, but the fact that you can be basically, it can be an insider attack inside of AT&T or Verizon is what please don't use SMS unless you have to.
Yeah, there was a study done. It's less than $200 is what it would take to go to a cell phone store to pay an associate to SIM swap for you.
Exactly. You have relatively low paid employees who can control access to something that could become keys to your kingdom. Okay, so that's why again I emphasize that it's a social thing, and social things are much more easier to exploit because you just have to find a person who's willing to bend their morals.
Yep. Let's see. What can I do to secure folks' home routers? Great question. That's going to be difficult to do. It's not impossible to do. One of the first things you should do is make sure that remote access to those is actually turned off. Unfortunately, they're typically turned on. Make sure that the administrator username and password is up to date and changed. Make sure they're patched, because that never happens on people's D-Link routers and Netgears and stuff. Those things just do not get patched at that point in time. Those would be the main two things that I would tell you to do.
Yeah, Josh, can I interrupt real quick?
Yeah,
I have a slightly, and take what I say with a grain of salt. I'll try to control my biases as much as I can. I think touching people's home routers is a can of worms that you do not want to open, because then you will become tech support for all their home networking issues. I think if you are concerned, and this is one of those sticky situations that I do not know a good solution for, so I can only provide what's better than nothing. Just touch, if I was an IT admin, I would not touch a home router with a 10-foot pole, just because I don't want to be on call then for every single time that the Xbox can connect to, whatever. If you want to secure that person in home, and again, this is where I'm obviously biased, and I don't know if you can do one of two things. You can either build a Wi-Fi island for them. No, first of all, let's start with the most simple, easy thing. Make sure their endpoint is their laptop, the device that they're working on, is super protected with endpoint is patched and is managed, right? And they're not sharing that laptop with their kids or spouses. Secondly, you can start leveling up the security level. You can issue them, for example, a remote cloud managed access point that also builds a tunnel back to the central location, and then that access point provides corporate credentials, corporate Wi-Fi, so only they can connect to it, and everybody else. So effectively, they have like an island of sanity inside of a home network that you do not want to touch. That access point can also be obviously a smaller firewall, etc. But I am scared whenever somebody says, let's configure home routers, right? Because again, you will become tech support. If you've ever fixed computers for friends or family, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would, I go a little bit deeper than that, though. I would not touch their stuff for them. But what I would do from a business perspective is actually create security best practices white paper for my employees.
Yeah.
That says, we can't as a business do this for you, but here are the things that you should be doing, including down to turning on MFA for all of your personal accounts. But from your home router, this is what you should be doing. Look for network segmentation. Make sure you're running WPA2 with no open Wi-Fi, which kills me when I still see the neighborhood with open Wi-Fi. But
It's
from a
enabled by
design,
default. By the way, it's enabled by default by the cell. By like I know I have AT&T and I had to manually turn off guest Wi-Fi because it's in AT&T's interest to have people to be able to connect to my Wi-Fi rather than the cell tower, right? So that it
Right.
takes load off the cell tower.
Yeah, and a lot of the devices now will come shipped with like another version of that on that's basically creating almost like a bridge wireless for anybody that has AT&T. It's allowed to get on your home AT&T and use your internet just because it's AT&T. But we have actually successfully over the last 12, 14 months done a lot of the deployments where we're shipping sonic waves to somebody's home. They plug that access point in. It's already pre-configured to fire up a VPN tunnel back to corporate. And now you can connect your laptop to just that Wi-Fi and you're segmented off from the rest of your home network. And all you had to do was install a single access point. I see a question there for preferred home router. I don't have one. I don't know if you do, Dmitriy. I mean, we probably are both.
We're terrible people to ask that because I get these, I get these for free, so you can't ask me this question.
Yeah, I'm running enterprise grade Wi-Fi and firewall in my house, so I'm sorry, I can't really help you out with that one.
I mean, without sounding like complete shills, right? So I'll just stay away from.
Yeah. Trying to see if there was anything else in here we missed.
I want to point out some really good tips that some of the attendees threw out in here as well. And on the topic of the message, the external email message that comes, and this is one I see from a lot of people that are too long. And I'm just going to read it verbatim because I think it's great advice. But advice for anyone that decides to implement the external email disclaimer: keep the message short. The default message, as an example from Office 365, prevents staff from seeing the beginning of the message from clients and coworkers on mobile devices. So, basically, if it's too long, and knowing that a lot of us are functioning on mobile devices, a lot of the times it's too long and not functional, and makes it really easy to ignore. So I think that's wonderful advice to manipulate that to make it as usable as humanly possible for your employees.
I think it's great. Typically, what we're doing is just making it, star external star, right? To do that, that's what I see a lot of times. Great question was just posted there by Aaron. Should we rotate it? That's actually maybe not a bad idea. What I would say though in practices is that I feel like if you're doing security awareness training internally, quarterly or biannually, and then you're also phishing quarterly, which I big advocate for doing quarterly phishing campaigns internally, because it'll then auto enroll if you use the right system, people back into training. It'll teach them, every 90 days, which is a theory that every 90 days people have to be reminded of the right things to do. It's just something in humans that actually has to happen for the most part. So if you do that quarterly, then they will be more likely to actually look at the external tag because they're being reminded and they're being tested on that. So, but if you wanted to change that up, you definitely could do that with all your external email tags.
Put in like first 15 people who, no, that's a long tag. Then first 15 people who read this and email back get a whatever $20 gift certificate.
Right. Yep. Hey, I'm telling you, man, it happens all the time. What people won't do for a $15 Amazon gift card.
This is true. And we've seen a few questions too, asking if we have good resources for making the case of MFA, among other things, to management. There are lots of good places to pull that from, and we're generally very good at putting that together and finding it too. So I will definitely take an action from this and help circulate with people some of the great cases and points to touch on if you're trying to make the case to upper management who maybe don't want to give up things that are more comfortable, that help make a good business case.
Perfect.
Let's see any other questions.
Right.
I think that's all.
I think that's it.
Yeah, and anything else we didn't get to, there were a few little personal pieces. We will definitely make sure to follow up with those after the event. So just thank you again for everybody for joining us today. Thank you, Josh and Dmitriy, of course, as always, for a great conversation. And do apologize to everyone for going a little bit long here, but almost everybody stuck around, so we must not have been doing anything wrong. We must have been okay. So thanks again Everybody should have gotten a Grubhub gift card code as a special thank you for attending. So if you didn't, let me know. Reach out to me directly, kara.parfit@cerdant.com, and I will help out with that. But have a great day, and thanks again for joining.
All right.
Perfect.
Thanks for
Thanks,
having us.
Dmitriy.
All right. Bye-bye. Take care.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.